Hi, welcome to Tuesday's Facebook Live. Jody here from Healing Journey, www.healingjourneyservices.com. So I help women and men get to root causes of their gut dysfunction and anxiety. And in today's Facebook Live, I'm going to be talking about 4 reasons why your SIBO treatment isn't working. So if you haven't checked out my previous videos and you're kind of new to SIBO and you're asking yourself, what the heck is SIBO? Go to my Facebook or YouTube page and check out the previous 2 videos where I talk all about what SIBO is and some ways to tell that you have it. But in this video, we're going to be doing a little bit of a deeper dive into treatment of SIBO. Before we dive in, I just want to let you know that I am launching an amazing membership program. So this is a much more affordable way for women to access lab testing and lifestyle coaching. If you don't want to work one-on-one with me, you can join this awesome group of very supportive women. So I'm going to be taking over that membership on October 14th. And if you'd like to be a part of it, please let me know. This is a great way for you to get to the root causes of your gut issues. You can access the GI map, you can access hair and mineral testing, mold testing, and a whole host of other issues, including the SIBO test that I'm going to be talking about today. So be sure and message me if this is something you'd like to be a part of, because it's a super affordable way for you to get some support and resources from me without having to pay the one-on-one consultation fees. Okay, so let's jump right in. So let's talk about mistake number 1 for SIBO. So just a quick overview for those of us that are joining me today and haven't watched the other videos. SIBO stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And that's basically when bacteria that belongs in the colon migrates its way up to the small intestine and starts producing a lot of gas. And this often is the cause of a lot of your IBS symptoms. And so a lot of people are becoming more and more familiar with SIBO. And so I want to focus today on treatment mistakes, because it's really important if you're going to get rid of SIBO to do it properly. It requires an intense amount of effort, a lot of money for protocols. And so if you go through all of that work, you want to make sure that you're doing it right. So first and foremost, the mistake that I see a lot of people make is they come to me and they're like, hey, Jody, I want to do a SIBO test. I really think that I have SIBO. I have all the symptoms of SIBO, the gas, the bloating, the stomach discomfort, the smelly farts, like a whole bunch of stuff. I'm certain that I have SIBO, so let's just go balls to the wall and treat SIBO. The problem with doing that is that you can't treat SIBO first. SIBO actually is one of the last things that I will treat with people, and that's because it's often a secondary infection. And what that means is that SIBO is going to start to occur in your small intestine if there's other imbalances that are going on that create that environment for it to grow. So, for example, if you have parasites, this is going to create a lot of dysbiosis in your gut. And your gut's not going to be functioning very well. You're not going to be able to break down your food properly. You may not be producing enough digestive enzymes. And so the body's natural way of doing that is to allow this small intestinal bacterial overgrowth to happen, because it's going to be starting to ferment the foods for you because your body can't. So in a way, SIBO is actually functional, even though it's creating all of these nasty symptoms. And so what you're actually going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that you get rid of those symptoms first. Those causes first. And so some of the causes, can be parasites, if you have worms, if you have H. pylori, which is an infection in the stomach, if your stomach digestive enzyme production isn't that great, if you're eating foods that you're intolerant to, all of these things are creating a pretty nasty environment in your stomach and in your small intestine, and that's going to lead to SIBO growth. So if you spend, all this time and all this money on, protocols for SIBO, and you haven't gotten rid of all of these things, then the SIBO is just going to come right back. And then you're going to be really disillusioned with your body's ability to fight it and with the herbs' ability to work, when in fact that's not the problem. The problem is you haven't gotten to the core issue of why SIBO's there. So I want to be very clear with this, because SIBO, although it tends to be the main contributing factor to a lot of, IBS-like symptoms, it is not the root cause of your stomach difficulties. It's kind of a layer, right? So you have mold issues, if you have worms, if you have parasites, that's kind of your root cause level. If you have metals that the parasites are feeding off of, or mineral imbalances, that's the root cause. And then, because things are a mess, we have SIBO, which kind of helps the digestion along, but the side effect is it creates these terrible symptoms, and then we have those symptoms. So really, really important here, before you tackle SIBO, you need to make sure that you've gotten everything else in the clear, and you also need to make sure that you're eating well. Okay. The second mistake that a lot of people make when they're treating SIBO is that they will do what's called a low FODMAPs diet while on SIBO. So that's basically a low fermentable carbohydrate diet. And so basically foods that are high in a FODMAPs diet, so there's a whole list of foods, you can Google them, that are kind of considered high FODMAPs foods. And those foods will actually feed the bacteria and cause it to grow. So a lot of times it will create a lot of symptoms for people with SIBO. So if you're eating things like, the healthy foods like probiotics, like garlic, like onions, cruciferous vegetables, certain kinds of sugars, even honey, all of those things are going to be feeding SIBO. And so you may feel super shitty when you're taking this stuff. And so a lot of people think, hey, I'm on the SIBO regime, I'm like taking herbs, or I'm doing an elemental diet, and I need to eat low FODMAPs to kind of help that to work. And that's actually not the case at all. And the reason being is that antibiotics in particular don't work on hibernating bacteria. So if you're not feeding the SIBO bacteria, they're kind of going to go into a bit of a shell, they're going to protect themselves, they're not going to be active, and because they're not active, they're not coming out of their hiding places, the protocols that you're taking aren't going to be effective. And so you actually have to eat some sort of fermentable carbohydrates during this time. And so this way you can make sure that the bacteria is being fed, that it's staying out in the open, and that it can be killed by the herbal or traditional antibiotics. So in a sense, the FODMAPs foods, the high FODMAPs foods, are kind of like cheese in a mousetrap, okay? So really, really important here, because a lot of people think, hey, I feel better on this, I'm going to eliminate all food sources for this bacteria, and we're going to wipe it out. And that is actually not the case. So when you do want to do a FODMAPs diet is when you're done with all of the protocol. So when you've kind of decided, meaning you've tested or the symptoms are reduced significantly, that the SIBO is gone, that's when you're going to want to do a low FODMAPs diet. It's actually recommended that you do a low FODMAPs diet in combination with a specific carbohydrate diet. So to do a combo of both of them for about 3 months after you've successfully gotten rid of SIBO. So that's really the time and place when we want to put that low FODMAPs diet in place, okay? So if you're, feeling better before you actually do treatment, feel free to do low FODMAPs, but once you're entering the treatment regime, you need to wait for that regime to finish, for the SIBO to clear, and then you're going to want to do 3 months of pretty strict FODMAPs, and that way you're not feeding that bacteria. And so that's where the FODMAPs diet comes in, and that actually is the second mistake that a lot of people make when treating SIBO. Okay, so let's talk about the third mistake that people make. So the third mistake that people make when they're treating SIBO is they don't actually properly test for SIBO initially and then throughout the treatment process. So a lot of people will say, hey, I have a lot of the symptoms. I feel shitty on probiotics. I feel shitty when I have a high FODMAPs diet. It must be SIBO. And it's really, really important to test. I've had a lot of people come to me, thinking they have SIBO, kind of fitting the classic diagnostic criteria of SIBO, when in fact SIBO wasn't the issue at all. It was other issues. And so you really need to test here, especially if you're really serious to get rid of it. The other reason why it's important to test is you need to know what type of gas you have. So the treatment for methane gas producing SIBO is actually very, very different for the treatment for hydrogen gas producing SIBO. So remember, the hydrogen positive SIBO, that is more where you're getting that diarrhea. And the methane positive SIBO is more where you're getting that constipation. And so the treatment's going to be very different. So for example, hydrogen positive SIBO, if you're using antibiotics, it's rifaximin. Methane positive SIBO, you can use rifaximin, but you also need to add in flagyl or neomycin. Okay, so it does make a difference for sure when you're doing that. And the same thing goes with herbal treatments. So, hydrogen positive SIBO, some of the herbal treatments I use are candibactin AR and BR. So that's kind of what I'm using for the hydrogen positive, where for methane positive, I'm going to use Alamax Pro. Okay. So it's going to be different. And so we need to know that. And then the retest, you need to know, is it working? Because there is the option of an elemental diet, that you can do. I mean, this is not my first go-to, but it is a way of treating that SIBO if traditional forms of treatment aren't working. So it's really important to look at, that testing as you're going along to see, are the numbers reducing? Maybe the types of SIBO bacteria changing. So maybe you're moving more into the methane type of bacteria as treatment goes along, or maybe it's going the opposite way. And so that treatment is going to fluctuate as you go along. And then you need to be sure that you've cleared the SIBO before you go into that low FODMAPs diet. So this is why it's really also important to test, because a lot of times it requires a couple of rounds of treatment, not just one round. So if you're just doing that one round of treatment, then that's going to be pretty problematic if the SIBO is still there, because you might assume it's gone when in fact it's not gone. You need a second or maybe a third round of treatment before you kind of head into the maintenance support. Okay, and the big one that a lot of people miss, so this is number 4, which is you're not doing Prokinetics. So if you watched my earlier videos, I talked a little bit about the migrating motor complex. And so the migrating motor complex is a very natural part of your intestinal mobility, and it's kind of creating that wave, right? That cleaning wave. So it happens between meals. And for people with SIBO, it happens less frequently. So you're not kind of sweeping the small intestine. So there's a greater chance that those particles are going to be hanging around, those food particles, they're not getting swept out of the way. And if you have those food particles hanging around, guess what you're doing? You're creating a great opportunity for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So you might have done all of this work for treatment, and then you're not the mobility sucks. And so you're just going to end up back where you started because there's other issues contributing to it. So again, the migrating motor complex essentially is a bit of a root cause. And this can be an issue for people with diabetes or scleroderma. So they may, always need to be on a prokinetic. Food poisoning can actually, certain kinds of it, can actually trigger an autoimmune attack against the nerve cells related to the migrating motor complex. And so for some people, there's an underlying autoimmune issue that they're just kind of learning about now. And so that really can really indicate a need for Prokinetics. So Prokinetics are going to be helping you to maintain that movement. So there's usually if there's been a 75 to 90% improvement in symptoms and the client's tested, so if you've tested negative for SIBO, then you should start that Prokinetic immediately. So it needs to be started between 1 to 5 days after treatment and used for a minimum of 3 months, and it can be from 3 to 12 months. So it can be a really, really long time and or forever, depending on what your underlying issues are, just to kind of help that mobility and to prevent that clogging of the food particles hanging around. So I really hope that video was informative for you and it guides you along your SIBO treatment. I do work one-on-one with individuals. I offer breath testing. I also offer testing for root causes for SIBO. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I have a really cool membership program. If you're not interested in working one-on-one, you can also email me at support@healingjourneyservices.com. If you have any questions, or I'd love to hear what you learned or found interesting in this video, please post it below.